These headsets always feel so motivational. It's like, who wants to get rich today? I'm going to show you the 3-step solution to turn your positivity into profit. Hey, I'm Potch. I work at Mozilla, where I have for about 6 years. And you may know me better from my appearances on television, where I was on Startup Silicon Valley, the short-lived Bravo series, or as a background character in the very, very short-lived What Would Brian Boitano Make? That's me. I had to sign a release and everything. Yeah, presently I work at Mozilla, where I'm a developer advocate, as Jen so astutely said. But before I ever worked in web development, I was a child of television. I can still recite the Stick Stickly address song from Nick in the Afternoon. If you want to throw down during the Q&A on 90s Nickelodeon stuff, just submit your questions now, because I will bring the thunder. But as such, I've always been fascinated by stuff that appears on TV. And TV is this digital hearth that's in everyone's house. And so it was really cool when the manager for web development team a few years ago said that we were going to get some televisions mounted in the web development area at our office to be used for the purpose of, quote, dashboards and stuff. And so without much ado, the facilities came in and drilled holes in the wall and mounted these TVs and ran networking. And we grabbed an old Mac Mini that had been laying around, and we ran 2 different displays to it, and then we didn't know what to do. So we built dashboards and stuff. They started off really, really simple. Back when GitHub was not exactly as reliable as it is today, it was really useful to know that when everyone lost their productivity, why, and then various status of our internal continuous integration and stuff like that. But rapidly, the idea of having a television nearby meant we started putting all kinds of stuff there. We wrote an IRC bot that would take every image URL that was sent in the channel and put it on the TV, which then led to us building a panic button we could press to turn off the TVs. After the entire office was completely overtaken by the craze that was Cookie Clicker, we wrote an extension that would just click the button as fast as it can and ran it on a television so we wouldn't have to anymore. And buoyed by this, what we're gonna call success, when we built out a new office, they decided to put TVs everywhere, not just in the web dev area, but a pair of televisions in front of sort of every work area in the office. And we realized that the pile of silly scripts that we had for putting stuff on the TVs was gonna end up being useful. So we built a classic second system that does everything and nothing, and we called it Corsica. And it's a completely plugin based thing that uses WebSockets and iframes on every television to route web content all over the place. And over time, that's grown to be sort of the office digital signage that we've used. We have sort of 3 kinds of content I like to think about it when people ask about the televisions. We have what we call regularly scheduled programs. Every 2 minutes, the TV switches to a new piece of content. This is stuff like what's for lunch. Or the current transit and drive times and traffic information from the Mountain View office to a bunch of other locations. Or open jobs. So if you want to refer someone for a role, a random job appears. We also have what we call public access programming. I built all the dashboards you see, but other people saw that they could get their content in front of everybody else and put information in front of the eyes of the office. And so they started submitting pull requests to this file, which is actually the internal configuration for the whole system. We even made it so people could just give us Google slide decks, and we pick a random slide and put it up on the TV. So if someone didn't know how to build a website, they could get their content up. And that led to things like how many regressions or blocking bugs are in the next version of Firefox. This is an older one. But it's really nice to see an executive come by and watch them ask why that number is big, and then everyone scramble. It's much lower now. What's the current shipping status? It's really nice to know at a glance whether the latest version of Firefox has gone out, whether we're having a problem on one of the release channels. My job, I want to be able to blog and tweet about new features, and sometimes that means knowing that even though it's ship day, we actually haven't shipped the bits yet. So this was a useful one. Some of the people on the internal team have stuff for pushes and backouts for the various branches of Mozilla's code base. We also have on-demand programming. This takes a couple of forms. I took a tablet and built a little remote so people passing through the common area can queue up information they want, like what's for lunch, we have some EV chargers, commuting info, and the puppy button, which displays a random GIF of a puppy on the TVs, which has been called the greatest contribution I've made to the organization to date. It's really great to see someone kind of trudge through the kitchen, walk over, push that, and like get that quick endorphin hit of a puppy, and then be on their way to a meeting. We also have an extension that lets you take a dank meme that you might find and just put it straight onto the TVs that are near you with the expectation that you're going to be polite and not put inappropriate things up there. So a question we got when people realized that the TV in our office was not programmed by some shadowy cabal was, how did they get on the TV? And at first people would just come with a random web page, and random web pages don't necessarily make awesome TV content. So I actually started thinking about this and documenting it for people in our office, and I want to share some of the stuff that I learned here. The first section of this is really what works well, what kind of content looks good, works well on a television. And I'm going to warn you that even though this is JSConf, we're going to get into a little bit of style stuff. But the biggest thing is that television stuff needs to be large print, or as we call the 10-foot UI. If you're more than 10 feet or more away, can you still figure out what's going on over there? A standard website with tiny fonts and images and lots of detail isn't going to be enough. Actually, Google, for their Android TV platform, made this awesome graphic where you can see that the angular occlusion of a television is actually not that different from the phone you're holding close to your face. In this room, especially if you're in the balcony, if you pick up your phone, you can kind of cover even this massive screen with your phone. Which leads me to tell people that TVs are faraway mobile phones, and worse, they're faraway mobile phones that you can't touch. So what have we learned about building for mobile phones? We have this whole responsive design movement, and we actually have a lot of skills and things that we've learned already. And this is where I get into some of the CSS stuff. Specifically, viewport units. Are any of you, this is the first time you've ever heard those words? Raise your hand. If not, viewport units are a way of talking about the size of an element on a page in terms of the size of the viewport. They're completely resolution independent. 1 VW is 1% of the viewport width, no matter how big it is. 1 VH is 1% of the viewport's height, no matter how big it is. 1 VMin is 1% of whichever is smaller with their height, and 1 VMax is 1% of whatever is smaller with their height. For instance, all of my slides actually use viewport units, so you can see as I scale, the text stays exactly the same size as whatever my window is. And actually, I lay everything out using viewport units. So if I'm on an 800 by 600 display versus a 1920 by 1200, everything is more or less in the same place. The text wraps in the same spot. Also available is the media query for televisions. No, sorry, that doesn't exist. It was specified, and a couple browsers took a crack at implementing it, but when you plug a computer into a TV, how does that computer magically know it's a television? Some smart TVs try to support this, but it's so broken across the board, and a lot of the popular ways of putting stuff on your TVs now don't support this at all, which is really unfortunate. It means that you mostly have to build TV-specific UI and call it out by name. Because how else can you know whether you're on just a big monitor or a big monitor that someone stuck to a wall and put a couch on the other side of the room? It's actually presently more or less impossible to know the difference, which is a huge limitation of what we're doing, and is why you see most TV content sites either offer an explicit option or let you either an explicit URL that's TV dot or let you click a button for sort of large view mode. However, we do have a couple of media queries that work. The big one that I like to use is aspect ratio queries. These are really great for determining not so much whether your phone is how a device is oriented, but merely the actual aspect ratio of the display. The slides use an aspect ratio of 16 by 9, and I can kind of letterbox them by saying, is my display wider than by 16 by 9? If so, make it as tall as the display. Is my display narrower than 16 by 9? Okay, I'll make it as wide as the display, and then use a known height. You can also do this from within script. We're back in JavaScript land. You can actually query information about the display by asking the DOM to evaluate a media query and give you back an object that says, did this media query pass, and in what respects did it pass? The other secret to a faraway mobile phone you can't touch is accessibility. Accessibility is for everyone. Sometimes accessibility is someone who doesn't have the use of their limbs, and sometimes a web page that is accessible is a web page that is accessible for a TV user. And that's why things like tab index are so important, because a lot of times, the only way that your user has to interact with your content is a D-pad and maybe an OK button. And a lot of times, the D-pad actually just advances through your tab order and tries to focus the links on your page. Having access to keyboard events and responding well to keyboard events and making sure that when the user presses the keyboard event, stuff on the UI gets appropriately focused, another huge way. Focus states and active states. If you don't have a cursor, how do you know what you're over right now? Making sure that the content that's on the page is blown up or somehow visually indicated that says, okay, this is where the focus currently is. If you move left, you're going to go here. If you move right, you're going to go here. But having good focus states and not just clearing the focus ring to none on outline means that your site may accidentally work great on a television, even if you didn't know it. So yeah, tab index, critical. Keyboard input, critical. So those are a couple of the really simple tricks. Most of the stuff you know about layout is going to apply to a TV, provided you have a modern enough browser. But how do you get a browser on a television? A lot of smart TVs come with a built-in browser that, for the most part, is pegged to a version of WebKit that is, at this point, completely ancient, older than Phantom.js, or forked and has a bunch of stuff turned off because it's such a low-spec hardware. So the built-in browser is, while available, frequently extremely low capability, and unless you're targeting a specific television subset of the web, you're not going to have a good time. Firefox we actually have a Firefox OS TV that we're doing with Panasonic, which has a fully modern web browser baked right into the TV. Panasonic and Firefox, I'm not sure if we're still shipping those TVs. It was an experiment, and we actually have them in the market. And if you can find them, mazel tov. But I would love to get this technology baked into more TVs. But it's a really hard relationship putting browser software on TVs. However, we have a bunch of other devices. The Chromecast, and this is the second version of the Chromecast, actually has a full API for taking, they call Chromium content, which is web HTML5 content, and putting it on the television. It works. I've played with it. It works really well. But there are a number of limitations you have to be aware of. You can't just say, I want to go to http:// and put that on my TV. You have to, this was the actual instructions. This is not to slide Google, but these are the instructions for getting the Chromium receiver app on your TV. Just check out the code from GitHub, and then get a Chromecast device, and then set it up for development and register the app with them, and set up the project dependencies and insert your app ID. So, which is not a bad thing. You can do this and it works. However, it means that you have to register yourself with a middleman, and sometimes for either debugging or for experimentation, or just because you're trying to make a lot of these things, having a central registry of apps can be sort of a pain. But it does work, and it's a great modern browser. Chromecast keep themselves up to date, and it works really well. But yeah, limitations. The user must be using a Chrome browser, or must be using the Google Cast SDK in the launching app. So when you use Google Chromecast, you take out your phone and you send it to the TV. You can only do that from Google Chrome. And you must have the Google Cast extension installed if you do this on desktop. So it does work. You can get content on the TV. There's a bunch of hurdles. It doesn't just work with a standard web browser and a standard television. But it's a great way to get started. Amazon actually recently announced that they have Fire TV HTML5 app support, and it's approximately the same process with a little bit more low touch, and you don't necessarily have to have a Google Chrome device in the user's hand to launch the stuff. I have some links to the information there at the end of my slides. The easiest way to do it right now is to get a computer and plug it into your television. The Raspberry Pi is a great low-cost way to do this. There are builds of browsers available for the Raspberry Pi 3. We're actually working on an officially sanctioned Firefox build for the Raspberry Pi. So you can load Firefox and get a Raspberry Pi plugged into your TV, and you can start playing around with that stuff. It's a great network-connected device. It's low cost, it's lightweight, it's low power. The solution that still works the best today is a computer plugged into a television with a cable. This is not ideal, but it's a great way to start experimenting today. Even though this stuff is still in its infancy, most devices have a video out, and most televisions have a video in. So how do you interact with a faraway mobile phone you can't touch? You can use the D-pad on your remote, or you can build a smarter remote. So I'm going to go into a couple technologies that will make it easier for the phone in your hand or the computer in your lap to interact with your television. The first one, it's an oldie at this point, is WebSockets. Once you get a URL open on the other end, you can both be talking to the same server. User can open a UI on their phone or their laptop or whatever device and start interacting and sending commands that are relayed off the WebSocket server. However, how do you get the initial content to the TV? There are actually a couple protocols out there that do this. One of them is called MDNS. MDNS is also called ZeroConf for Bonjour, but it's a protocol for local network discovery of other devices. If you've ever typed something .local into your laptop or into your phone to pull up something else on your local network, you've used Bonjour, you've used MDNS. And built on top of this technology, Firefox is about to get the ability to discover MDNS servers on your local network. And we're calling it FlyWeb. Experimental support is behind a preference in Firefox Nightly today. It works right now as follows. Everything is subject to change and experimental. But if I go to this button, I can discover nearby FlyWeb services, and you can see someone is configuring a D-Link router in this room, which is lovely. Make sure I'm connected to the wireless, or this does not work. I am, cool. Let me kick my test server, all crazy experimental. Cool, here's a sweet television device on my local network. And I'm using, even though they're on the same computer, I'm actually using MDNS broadcasting to the whole local network. Anyone else who has MDNS discovery will see this if they're on the Wi-Fi. If I click to it, it opens a sweet, awesome television interface in my browser. Hopefully following all of the best practices. I'm gonna quick go back full screen. There's also Dial, which is a protocol that's built actually underneath. It's what Chromecast uses underneath the hood, and a lot of smart TVs use this. Dial is also sometimes called DLNA. If you have a console and you've ever wanted to stream video or put photos on there, or take stuff off your hard drive and play it on your console, you've likely used the Dial protocol. It's pretty well documented. There are a lot of great node modules for all of these out there that you can start experimenting with. And there's Bluetooth. Bluetooth is awesome because if I'm near something, I can start interacting with it. I don't have to join the right wireless network, make sure the credentials are on, make sure we both have a network connection. We can just immediately start exchanging packets. And the FlyWeb stuff that I showed is eventually going to work over Bluetooth as well as MDNS, where a device can actually send you a web page. It's HTTP over Bluetooth or HTTP over MDNS, and you'll be able to interact with stuff in your immediate vicinity without having to necessarily go through the dance of connecting to an ad hoc wireless network, broadcast by the device, setting it up, disconnecting, connecting to your network, etc. The other technology is WebRTC. If you really want low latency stuff like a video game controller on your phone that controls a game on your TV, WebRTC is awesome because it's super low latency. You're going to create a peer-to-peer connection. You're going to create an encrypted peer-to-peer connection. And you can have multiple devices all directly streaming content back and forth between your television or the device connected to your TV and a device you've got in your hands. However, you still need a third party to discover both of you and start that conversation. So you're still going to need a computer. You're still going to need some sort of server out there. However, WebRTC is an awesome way to build super responsive UI to interact with the television. So that's a lot of information, and the big question people ask me is, with all this stuff being so messy, why even start playing with this today? And it's true, you can't use much of this in production. Sure, you can build a Chromecast app, and that will work, and you can put that in production and put it in the store, or even charge for it, and you can do that today. But everything is still really fractured. But we need people to experiment in that environment, so we start getting best practices. We start getting the sort of de facto solutions that we can standardize. Browsers want to move into this space because there's nothing better than writing some HTML and CSS and JavaScript and seeing it on a device. I got into this because I wanted to make video games. I wanted to be on TV, and I wanted to, and the ability to write code in Notepad when I should have been paying attention in computer lab and run it in a browser was the whole reason I got into web development. And we need people to start pushing against this frontier, because if we don't, we may never get there. And the browser vendors need you to start saying, this is a cool way to do this. Oh, I built this awesome thing. Because that pressure helps me go to our platform team, our product team, and say, look at the cool stuff that's already being done. Shouldn't we support this? The reason I describe myself as a web developer advocate and not, a developer relations person is when I come back from this conference, people aren't going to ask me so much what product I sold you. I'm going to get hammered by our platform team, by our product team for feedback. They're going to tell me what were people excited about in the room? When people showed stuff off, what people get excited about? How do we prioritize this never-ending list of APIs and standards? And how do we figure out which ones we need to do next? Or where are we behind? And my job is to advocate for your voices within Mozilla and within the standards community to make sure that the stuff you want to build gets easier to build. And hopefully, if you start experimenting with this stuff pretty soon, you can also be as seen on TV. So thank you very much. The slides for my talk are here. Here's a couple links to some of the projects I discussed, and I'll be around in the Q&A and after the talk to chat with people. Thanks so much.
It's really interesting. I'm glad that you ended with this sort of get interested in it, because it's inevitable, it's happening, it's been happening, so push the people, the browser vendors to deal with it. I worked in media a few years ago and built a thing for the NBA All-Stars weekend that was on a TV screen that was 20 feet high. It was a touch screen, and they realized last minute, they're oh, no one can really touch higher than 8 feet, because there's no one that's really that tall. But it was interesting how to scale down something that had been built and ready to work on a TV screen, and that was even just up close and being able to touch. What cool sites have you seen that have been TV first developed?
TV first. The first one I ever saw was actually, I think this will still work. If you go to tv.youtube.com right now, they built a full HTML5 TV user interface for smart TVs that, as far as I can tell, they've never really pushed. It doesn't look like any of their apps, but it's a full TV first experience where it's all about keyboard navigation. There's shortcuts for focusing the search field. It's really neat. A lot of the other ones tend to be informational because interaction has historically been so limited, or the TV is far away, or really big and you can't reach it, or things like that. Oh Heck Yeah is an awesome example of a cool interaction pattern for a big screen that's far away. And it's something I wish I had known about before my talk, because I probably would have found room to cover such a more inventive interaction mechanism that's really low. The user doesn't have to pull out a phone and install an app. They stand in a spot and it works, and that's awesome. Another thing I didn't get a chance to touch on was the physical web stuff that Google's doing, where you can also, similar to the FlyWeb stuff, you can discover things nearby and interact with things nearby. I know I diverged from your actual question. But yeah, the TV, great. YouTube stuff.
Yeah, because that will, along with VR and stuff, this is sort of a step before, actually. I guess using the TV to access the web and interact with the Connect API is sort of a more consumer-friendly, accessible version of VR until VR gets better and cheaper and stuff like that. But thank you very much for putting this on our laps. Thanks a lot.
Awesome.
Yeah. Everyone, thank you so much.